When the last missiles fall silent, when the sirens stop, when the sky is no longer bright with fire, the world does not end in a single moment. It simply changes, permanently. The idea of nations, borders, alliances, and identity, everything that once shaped how the world worked, becomes something different than it was before. The first morning after a global war would feel unreal, not dramatic, not cinematic, just quiet. A strange, heavy quiet that does not belong to peace, but to shock. In many cities, the buildings would still be standing. Streets would still exist. People would still wake up. But nothing would function the way it did before. Governments would be silent, phones would fail. The systems we depended on without thinking, power grids, water pumping stations, food distribution networks, would be fractured or gone entirely. Civilization is not destroyed by explosions. It is undone by the absence of the invisible threads that held it together. The countries least touched by the blast themselves would still feel the collapse. Trade would stop. Fuel would become memory. Money would lose meaning. Nations that once argued over interest rates and elections would now negotiate survival. Every country, no matter how powerful or distant, would face the same question. How do you rebuild when the world you depended on no longer exists? Some countries would fragment almost immediately. Large nations with diverse regions, the United States, Russia, China, India, would find their internal unity tested more than their external strength. Local governments might replace national ones. Borders inside the borders would begin to emerge. Others would turn inward with discipline and order. Nations like Japan, Switzerland, Finland, and Singapore, small, organized, accustomed to emergency planning, would have the greatest chance of stabilizing quickly. But even they would face shortages that no stockpile could completely solve. Meanwhile, countries far from the centers of conflict, South America, parts of Africa, remote island states, would suddenly become important in ways they had never been before. Not because of military power, but because they have land, water, and distance, the new currency of survival. This is what the world would look like in the quiet after World War III begins. Not ash and wasteland everywhere, but a planet where every nation must answer the same brutal question. What am I without the systems that once sustained me? Part 2, the new map. The map of the world after a global war would not change because of treaties or negotiations. It would change because of necessity. Power would no longer be determined by the size of armies or the shape of borders, but by access to three things: water, food, and stable land. Large nations hit hardest in the opening strikes would experience internal fracture first. The United States would not disappear, but its federal power would weaken. State and regional governments would take the lead, some coordinating, others separating out of urgency. Coastal megacities with high population density and little local agriculture would struggle. By contrast, interior regions with farmland, railroads, and fresh water, the Midwest, the Canadian prairies, Argentina's pampas, would become centers of gravity. Russia would contract, not because of invasion, but because of distance. Its vast landmass requires energy, fuel, and communication to function as one country. Without them, regions like Siberia and the Far East would drift away from Moscow's influence. Local leaders, military governors, or new alliances could emerge, not ideologically, but practically. A country the size of a continent cannot be managed in silence. China would face a different struggle. Its survival has always depended on movement: goods, fuel, cargo, ships. If trade stops, its immense population becomes a burden the state must control. Rural provinces could stabilize themselves, coastal megacities could empty. Unity would depend on whether the government can maintain communication and distribute food faster than panic spreads. Meanwhile, new centers of stability would appear where the world least expected them. Brazil, Argentina, Uruguay, New Zealand, places with fertile land and access to water, would be in a stronger position than many military powers. Their isolation, once considered geopolitical disadvantage, would become their greatest shield. Europe would not fall, but it would shrink. Countries would cluster into regional survival blocks. Borders would soften, not through diplomacy, but through shared scarcity. The idea of the European Union might fade, but the need for cooperation would remain, driven not by politics, but by hunger, fuel, and shelter. The map after World War III would not be drawn in ink. It would be drawn in migration routes. People will move where life remains possible, and nations will reform around where those people stop. Governments do not disappear after catastrophe. They adapt. After a global war, the most functional governments would be the ones that understand a simple truth. Control is not power. Stability is. The first governments to fail would be those built on centralized authority. Systems that require instant communication and obedience cannot survive when communication itself collapses. Leaders who depend on control would lose it in hours. Not because they are weak, but because no one can govern a population waiting for answers that cannot be given. In their place, local authority becomes the structure of survival. Mayors, governors, military base commanders, community organizers, even neighborhood councils. Anyone with a clear plan and access to resources becomes government by default. People follow the person who can keep water flowing and food available. Ideology no longer matters. Logistics does. In some countries, the military becomes the stabilizing institution. In others, religious organizations, tribal networks, or long-standing community groups take over. The specific shape varies by culture, but the pattern is universal. Authority returns to the scale of human trust. International organizations, the United Nations, NATO, economic alliances, would lose relevance quickly, not because their missions fail, but because nations no longer have capacity to participate. Cooperation shrinks to the regional level. Alliances return to geography, not ideology. Over time, a new form of governance emerges: resource rule. Power does not come from speeches or elections, but from control of water, farmland, medical supplies, transportation hubs, and energy sources. Leaders are judged not by promises, but by whether life under them is possible. This shift does not automatically lead to chaos. In many places, order becomes quiet, even disciplined. But it is an order built on rationing, coordination, and necessity, not law or constitution. The social contract simplifies into something direct. We survive together, or we do not survive at all. And slowly, a strange stability forms. Not the stability of peace, but the stability of adaptation. A world learning to live without the systems it once took for granted. The world after a global war would not return to the familiar rhythms of commerce and convenience. The global economy, once driven by constant movement, ships crossing oceans, flights linking continents, digital markets trading in microseconds, would collapse into something older and slower. The currency of ordinary life would shift from money to usefulness. Banks would close not because they are destroyed, but because currency itself would lose meaning. A dollar, a euro, a yen, all of them assume a functioning system behind them. When the system stops, value returns to what can be held, exchanged, or consumed. Food becomes currency. Fuel becomes currency. Medicine becomes currency. Warm clothing, tools, seeds, batteries, clean water filters. These become the new wealth. Daily life changes in small ways first. The light switches do not work. The internet does not load. Refrigerators are silent boxes. Phones become flashlights instead of portals. Without a working grid, every action requires physical effort. Cooking demands fire. Heat demands wood. Travel demands walking. The world becomes bigger again, measured by distance the human body can cover. Communities form around necessity. People who never spoke to their neighbors begin to share meals, tools, and watch shifts. Division, once ideological, becomes practical. Those who cooperate survive longer than those who isolate. Skills once considered hobbies, gardening, repair work, first aid, carpentry, become essential. In urban areas, scarcity arrives faster. Cities are systems built on constant delivery. Without trucks, ships, and fuel, shelves empty in days, crowds move. Some leave, others remain and adapt. In the countryside, life slows but stabilizes. Farms become fortresses of value, and rural towns transform into centers of trade, barter, and community rule. Education and work are no longer separate spheres. Children learn by doing. Survival becomes the curriculum. The modern world's greatest divide, the separation between thinking and making, disappears. Knowledge returns to its oldest form, skills passed by hand. And yet even in hardship, life does not become only struggle. People still gather, they speak, they sing. Shared hardship creates a unity that prosperity never could. After the collapse of the global economy, what remains is not wealth, but connection, the oldest economy humans ever knew. Part 5, the future that emerges. The world that rises after a global war is not a return to the past. It is something new, something built from memory, loss, and necessity. Nations survive, but differently. Communities endure, but more tightly. Humanity continues, but with a quieter understanding of itself. Borders eventually harden once more, but they are drawn along natural lines, rivers, mountains, fertile valleys, not political aspiration. Countries are smaller, more self-reliant, and less concerned with projecting power far beyond their territory. Empire becomes impossible when distance is too costly to maintain. Technology does not disappear. It sleeps. Machines wait in silent warehouses. Servers gather dust. Solar panels, satellite dishes, abandoned factories. The infrastructure of the old world remains like bones of a giant creature that no longer breathes. In time, some of it is revived, not in grand skyscrapers or limitless markets, but in careful, deliberate steps. Restoration instead of expansion. Culture deepens in ways the pre-war world rarely allowed. Communities preserve stories, languages, craftsmanship, and memory. Art changes tone. It becomes simpler, truer, closer to daily life. History is taught not in books alone, but in the landscapes that bear its scars. A generation grows up who did not see the old world, and they do not miss it. They build their own. Eventually, trade returns. Sailboats cross seas before cargo ships do. Markets reappear, first small, then regional. A new global order emerges slowly, cautious, decentralized, built on mutual necessity rather than dominance. The future becomes a negotiation, not a race, and humanity learns a lesson, though imperfectly. Survival is not guaranteed by strength, but by stability, cooperation, and restraint. The memory of what was lost remains a warning carved into the world itself. The world after World War III is not empty, nor is it doomed. It is changed, permanently. In some ways smaller, in others more human. The illusion of invincibility is gone, and with it the arrogance of endless growth. What remains is something quieter, more deliberate. A world learning to live within its limits. A world remembering what matters when everything else is stripped away. A world that continues forward, not because it must, but because life always finds a way to begin again.